On Tuesday, May 14th, the Karen Read murder trial continued with day 11 of testimony from the prosecution's case in chief. Caitlin Albert continued her testimony, and then we heard from 3 more witnesses. All of these witnesses testified to what they say happened at 34 Fairview Road, and to be honest, much of what these witnesses testified to was pretty uneventful. That is, until the last witness of the day, who testified to some pretty new, interesting information, and we saw a fiery cross-examination that may have brought that information into question. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with Caitlin Albert. If you remember, her cross-examination started on day 10 and continued into day 11. And one of the biggest issues here was the question as to whether the defense could introduce new photos of Caitlin Albert and Katie McLaughlin. Remember that Katie McLaughlin was a paramedic who testified to hearing Karen Read say, I hit him," when John O'Keefe was found the next day. And just before testimony began today, the judge told the defense that they'd need to go on basically a one-by-one basis for these photos, and she'd essentially make her decisions on the fly. And ultimately, defense attorney David Yannetti was successful in using a number of these photos to refresh Caitlin's recollection about these various events where Caitlin and Katie had in fact been around each other. It definitely sounded by the end that there was a stronger connection between the two of them than what either of them wanted to admit. That said, the question naturally comes up, where does that lead for this case? Is the connection strong enough to suggest that Katie McLaughlin would lie about Karen Read saying, I hit him? Or is it strong enough to suggest that she might otherwise get bendy with the facts to help cover for a family that she's been familiar with for a very long time? I don't know. Let me know what you think. But that was it for Caitlin Albert. The next witness was Tristin Morris, the boyfriend of Caitlin Albert. And if there's one phrase that I could use to describe the testimony of this witness, it's, I don't know or I don't recall. Now, in this trial, there have been quite a few witnesses who have testified and ended up relying very heavily on I don't recall. It seems to be a very convenient crutch that many of these witnesses are using in situations maybe where they don't want to admit or address uncomfortable facts, particularly on cross-examination. And hey, there are plenty of times where I don't recall is in fact an appropriate response. But over time, you can start to get a sense of when a witness might be overusing it, and especially in places where the witness seems like they otherwise should be able to remember that detail, all things considered. And then we have Tristin Morris. There was a lot that it seems that he couldn't remember across the board, but his memory issues were even more pronounced on cross-examination. But here's what we basically got from him. He testified that he joined with his girlfriend at the Waterfall Bar and Grill. He couldn't remember who else was there besides her. Then he went home early because there was an expected snowstorm that night. And when that happens, Tristin often worked as a snowplow for some extra cash. So he needed to go to bed earlier since he planned to get up earlier. The problem is, just before 2 a.m., Tristin picked up Caitlin from 34 Fairview Road after she had called in order to ask him to pick her up. When Caitlin testified about this herself, she agreed that the reason that he left so early was in fact to get some sleep. So this detail about him picking her up sounds a little weird. Either he wasn't really sleeping, or maybe she lacks some capacity for maybe respecting boundaries within that relationship, perhaps. And now he did testify towards the end of his testimony that Caitlin is high maintenance, so maybe the truer explanation is closer to the latter rather than the former. But anyway, other than this, Tristin seemed very committed to not remembering things, even where it would be reasonable for a person to use context to sort of narrow a gap of recall. For example, on cross-examination, he testified to not remembering what time he picked Caitlin up. When David Yannetti worked to narrow the scope of possibility of that timing by creating a time block, Tristin would not budge.
You were at 34 Fairview Road in Canton at 1:45 in the morning, or about 1:45, on January 29th of 2022, correct?
I don't remember the time.
Was it wildly different than 1:45 in the morning, or was it somewhat close to that?
I'm not going to make up a time. I don't remember.
Was it 9 p.m. on the 28th?
I don't remember times.
So if I asked you if you were there to pick up your girlfriend Caitlin at 9 p.m. on January 28th, you couldn't say if that's true or false?
No, because I'm not making up a time.
Okay, so it could have been 9 p.m. that you were there, not 1:45 in the morning.
I didn't say that.
Well, you've just said that you can't rule out that it was actually 9 p.m. on the 28th, didn't you?
Objection, Your Honor.
Can you answer that? Did you say that?
I didn't say anything. I don't remember a time.
No, I understand.
So I'm not going to make up a time.
Hold on. Only one person can speak at a time.
I don't, it could have been later, could have been earlier. I don't know a time.
Right, but it couldn't have been 9 p.m. on January 28th. Could it have been?
I don't know.
Okay. What time were you at the waterfall?
I don't remember.
Were you at the waterfall?
Yes, I was.
On what date?
The 28th.
Was it in the morning?
It was at nighttime.
It was at night, okay. What time did you leave the waterfall?
I don't remember.
Did you leave at 5 p.m.?
I don't remember.
So it could have been 5 p.m. that you left.
Could have been 5 in the morning. I don't know.
And the thing is, there are witnesses who will go into their testimony thinking that acting like this is a good way to best an attorney. You plant your feet, you dig your heels in, and you don't give them an inch. But the problem is, this is a bit of a short-sighted way of looking at the testimony, and it really misses the point of what's so important about the testimony. Although a good witness will stick to their guns on an important point, especially where they have conviction over the truth of what they're testifying to. If they do that over every single little thing, over time, a jury may decide that they're just being unnecessarily difficult and may start to question why. And that can impact ultimately how much weight the jury does give to that witness's testimony. And then this leads to the question, what's the point in this witness testifying in the first place? So in my opinion, even though Tristin Morris may have felt like he was giving it to David Yannetti, I don't know, maybe not. His lack of cooperation on the stand, at the end of the day, just, in my opinion, reflects very poorly on his overall testimony. Okay, so that's Tristin Morris. The next witness was Sara Levinson. She had been friends with Brian Albert Jr. for about 8 years, according to her testimony, and had been to the Albert home many times before. And she was one of those group of friends of Brian Albert Jr. who had come over to 34 Fairview Road earlier in the evening on January 28th, 2022. Now, most of what she testified to overlapped with the testimonies of other people. She said she and a small group of friends were there to celebrate Brian Albert Jr.'s 23rd birthday in a low-key hangout. They ordered calzones and were drinking beers and hard seltzers like White Claw.
White Claw? White Claw Summer 2019, baby. Basically just a vegan Four Loko.
I mean, if you think about it, LaCroix, it's just a virgin White Claw.
It's like a Four Loko that went to private school. Ain't no laws when you're drinking claws, baby.
Now, she was one of a couple friends who stayed up past midnight at 34 Fairview Road. The other friends who had left were named Courtney Alba, Catherine Duty, Emily Fabiano, and Mary Kent. At some point in the mix, Colin Albert also arrived. Sometime around midnight or so, that's when Brian and Nicole Albert and the others arrived in small groups within about 5 minutes of each other. At some point, Colin left, having been picked up by someone. However, on cross-examination, Sara agreed that she never actually saw Colin walk out the door or get into a car outside. She also testified that Jen McCabe had plugged her phone into a wall behind the kitchen island at one point. And on cross-examination, she agreed that Jen McCabe at one point picked up her phone, but she either didn't know or couldn't remember exactly what she did with it or maybe when. Then at some point between 1:30 and 2 a.m., she and her friend Julie Nagel got a ride home with Jen and Matt McCabe in their big SUV. She said that on their way out, it was actively snowing and that she was looking down at the ground trying not to slip. This is definitely the prosecution hinting as to why Sara and perhaps the others may not have noticed John O'Keefe lying in the snow in that moment. And in a similar vein, Sara testified that when they got into the car and started to leave, the girls noticed a loaf of bread in the back seat and peanut butter and jelly along with it and made a comment to Jen about it. Jen apparently responded with a joke like, anybody want a PB&J? And this further is to show where the attention was inside the car, to again explain why they wouldn't have seen John O'Keefe in the snow at that hour, since by the prosecution's timeline, he had been laying there for an hour or two. But is that explanation convincing, however? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Anyway, a couple final points about the things that came up on Sara Levinson's cross-examination. First, Sara was reminded that on May 11th, 2023, she testified in another hearing. And at that hearing, she testified that on the way out, although it was actively snowing, she could sort of see grass in the yard. This is an interesting point because on the one hand, this could help the prosecution in explaining why people may not have noticed the color differentiation between John O'Keefe lying in the yard and the snow that would have been around him. However, I've mentioned before that several first responders remarked at how when they arrived at 6 a.m., there was about 6 inches of snow on the ground, but only a light dusting on top of John O'Keefe. Those first responders were Officer Seraph, Officer Mullaney, and I believe Officer Flamati. In other words, according to prior testimony, it seems that there was 6 inches of snow under John O'Keefe. And so to me, that has always been an important point for helping to figure out the timing of when John O'Keefe's body landed in the place it was ultimately found. And so at the point that Sara leaves 34 Fairview Road, John O'Keefe's body was supposed to have been lying there for at least an hour. And if in the moment that Sara Levinson said that she was walking out, she says that there was grass still visible on the ground, the snow is not at the level of 6 inches yet. So if John O'Keefe's body was out there at that moment, how does that square with the testimony of those first responders about the 6 inches of snow under his body? That is something that I feel still needs to be explained by the prosecution. Anyway, the other interesting thing that she said on cross-examination was that on their way out, no one pointed out anything in the yard that was out of place. This will become an important nugget for the next witness's testimony, so keep it in mind. And the next witness that I'm talking about is Julianna Nagel, who everyone was referring to as Julie Nagel. Her testimony was basically the same as Sara's for maybe, 80% of Julie's testimony, until the end when she gives some actually pretty stunning testimony. Before this point, however, she testified that she was there for the same reasons as Sara at about the same time and left in the same car. She also testified that at one point Colin left, but on cross-examination agreed that she also never saw Colin actually walk out the door or get picked up by anyone else when he supposedly left. Anyway, there were two main pieces of her testimony that are very important to the prosecution. The first is from a moment when she went outside 34 Fairview Road to talk to her brother Ryan. If you remember Brian Albert Jr.'s testimony, he testified to observing Julie go out to talk to her brother, who pulled up in a pickup truck to give her a ride home. But when he arrived, she basically went outside and told him that she didn't actually need the ride anymore. Now, both Brian Albert Jr. and Julie Nagel testified that when they looked out the window in anticipation of Ryan swinging by, they noticed something outside. It was a black SUV that neither seemed to recognize. Now, we still don't have confirmation that this was Karen Reed's SUV, but the implication is definitely there. Anyway, they both testified to looking out at least twice. The first time the SUV was over by the mailbox, and the second time the SUV was over by the fire hydrant and the flagpole. But Brian Albert Jr. testified to seeing both the SUV and the pickup truck outside at the same time, including when Julie went outside to talk to her brother. Julie, on the other hand, testified on direct examination that when the pickup truck arrived, the SUV was gone.
Now, if I could bring you back to that period of time when you're outside. The vehicle that you were talking about, where is that in relation to the pickup truck that Ricky's driving?
Well, it was like the SUV wasn't there when my brother was there. It was like before. Like when I was inside, I noticed it. Yeah.
And so at the time that you were talking to your brother in the pickup truck, was the SUV still there?
I don't believe so, no.
And so where was that SUV parked in relation to where the truck was?
So when I noticed, looking out the window, I did notice the SUV in front of the mailbox, and then pulled up a little bit in front of the yard, and then stopped, and then pulled up again towards the flagpole.
So you saw it in sort of 3 different locations at the time that you were seeing it?
Correct, yes.
And again, where were you in relation to the vehicle at the time that you made these observations?
I was inside at the dining room table, looking out the window.
And at any point in time, did you see anybody come out of that?
I did not know.
Now, this is very important because it starts to block off the timeline of when Karen Reed could have hit John O'Keefe. There's been no allegation by either side so far that she swung by 34 Fairview Road more than once with John O'Keefe. So it would seem that if she did in fact hit him, it would have been right around that time that Brian Jr. and Julie saw the SUV outside. And when Julie stepped outside to talk to her brother, she said that she didn't see anyone get out, nor did she see any body in the snow at that moment. So the question would have been, if the SUV was still there when Julie walked outside, could Karen have hit John after Julie went back inside? But if Julie is testifying here that the SUV was already gone when she walked outside, then Karen would have already hit John by that moment. John would already be in the snow when Julie walked outside. Now, in cross-examination, defense attorney David Yannetti went into the details of what Julie observed of this black SUV. He broke it down to the speed, the direction it moved in, and more.
Like that. I want to go back, if I can, to when you were inside the house, because you had testified that when you were inside, you looked out the window and you saw a different vehicle, correct?
I did, yes.
That was the black SUV.
Yes.
And you've testified that you saw that black, from within the house, you saw that black SUV move 2 times, correct?
More than 2.
So it was at first parked near the mailbox,
Yes.
and then you saw it move forward, right?
Yes.
And then you saw it move forward again to near the flagpole, correct?
Yes.
And was there a third time that you saw it moved?
I saw it pull up, stopped, pulled up again, stopped, pulled up again by the flagpole, stopped. That's all I saw.
All right. And that was all while you were inside the house, correct?
Correct, yes.
When it was pulling up like that, Ms. Nagel, it wasn't going 80 miles an hour, correct?
It was not, no.
It wasn't going 50 miles an hour, correct?
I mean, I didn't have a radar gun on me, but no.
It was going at a safe speed, correct?
Yeah.
It wasn't going a very long distance, correct? Each time?
No.
Just a matter of several feet, correct? Adjusting its position?
Just pulled up and stopped a few times.
Right. And as you saw it pull up and stop a few times from within the home, its direction was always forward, correct?
From what I saw, yes.
You never saw that car back up, correct?
No.
You certainly never saw it speed at a crazy pace backwards, correct?
Objection.
Objection sustained.
So this was really interesting to hint to the jury the sort of elements that likely would be required for Karen to kill John with the impact from her car. We will undoubtedly be getting many more details on this kind of thing through an expert witness on the physics of how it would have happened for Karen to kill John with her car. But for now, we are getting testimony that there's no observation of any high rate of speed or even that the SUV was ever put in reverse at 34 Fairview Road. Now, of course, just because Julie didn't observe that happening doesn't necessarily equate to that not in fact happening. But remember that the prosecution has the burden of proof here. And so far, there is no evidence that's been put in front of the jury to suggest that Karen put her car in reverse and struck John with enough force to kill him at the moment that the prosecution says that this would have happened. Now, there was one final point that Julie testified to, which was really, really important to the prosecution, and that is that while driving away with the McCabe's around 1:45 a.m., she noticed a dark blob out in the snow.
And as you drive by home, what, if anything, did you observe?
I did notice behind Sara and Jen, I did notice something out of the ordinary, like a black blob in the ground by the flagpole.
And from where you were situated in the car, do you know sort of what was the lighting like over in that area of the yard that you saw by the flag?
It was pretty dark out, but the snow was kind of heavy at that point, so couldn't really see too much, but...
So the snow's coming down at that point?
Yes.
And if you know about where in relation to the flagpole was this black object that you saw?
I would probably say close to the street, but in their lawn, right kind of in front of the flagpole next to it.
Prosecutor Adam Lally then asked her to point out on a photo where on the lawn she saw it, and she indicated with a laser pointer basically the spot where John O'Keefe was found. Then he asked if Julie pointed this out to anyone else in the car.
Now, as the vehicle is going by the house, as you make that observation, what, if anything, did you say in the backseat of the car?
I did say out loud, I was like, I think I might have saw something. I'm not kind of sure what it was. But I was also intoxicated drinking, so didn't really know what I saw. But Sara was like, "What, Julie?" And I was like, "I don't know what it was." And then that was kind of really it.
And that was sort of the end of the conversation in reference to that, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And now this is very interesting because remember that earlier in the day, Sarah Levinson said that no one made any kind of a comment about seeing anything on the way out. Then again, as Julie testified, they had been drinking for a while, so maybe one of them doesn't remember this. But anyway, Lally had one more question for Julie on this point. How big was that black blob?
Ms. Nagel, if I could just ask you one more question. With regard to the object that you saw in that area, the flagpole, can you describe how big an object it was that you saw?
I'd probably say like 5 or 6 feet, like long, but
And at the time that you were driving by at that point, could you tell what it was?
not quite sure, no. It was just too quick to tell.
Now, this is the first time that anyone has testified to maybe seeing John O'Keefe in the snow on the earliest hours of January 29th, 2022. Although Julie says that she didn't see anything when she first went outside to talk to her brother. At this point, this is evidence that suggests to the jury that John O'Keefe was in fact there. And this is very big for the prosecution. And on direct examination, Julie came across as very credible, confident, and helpful. By the end of this direct examination, I really thought that the defense might in fact be in the beginnings of some trouble because she was pretty convincing on direct. However, we've learned by now, in this trial especially, not to count out the defense's ability to change things on cross-examination. One of the things that the defense attorney, David Yannetti, talked about in cross-examination was the fact that Julie had been at 34 Fairview Road from like 6 or 7 p.m. until around 1:45 a.m. And in that time, she had spent quite a bit of that time drinking. Now,
By the time you're texting Ryan, Ms. Nagel, how much do you think you would have to drink since 6 or 7 p.m.?
A decent amount.
Would you say that another word for it would be a lot?
No.
What were you drinking that night?
Michelob Ultras.
And how many did you have?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Did you bring your own Blob Ultras to the party?
I don't know.
You don't remember whether you brought any beer to the party?
I don't know.
Where was the beer?
I either brought it or I don't know. I don't remember. It was 2.5 years ago.
Where was it within the home?
In the fridge.
You have no memory of like running out of beer that night, correct?
I don't remember, no.
There appeared to be plenty of beer to go around, correct?
For myself, yeah.
Now, this is important because remember that on direct examination, she did say that she was intoxicated at the end of the night. And alcohol can impact perception and memory. And both of these things are things that jurors are going to be looking at to determine a witness's reliability. And so here, this was a moment where her body language and responsiveness totally changed as she was questioned on the details of her drinking. Maybe she really doesn't remember how much she had to drink that night or where the alcohol even came from, but she seemed to have a pretty good memory of the alcohol on direct examination. And so this could appear to be an example of what one of our viewers in the Day 11 live stream chat coined as cross-examnesia. Basically, this is where someone has a crystal clear memory on direct examination, and yet something happens to that memory, perhaps even on the same subject, when that witness gets to cross-examination. Now, I have no idea how the jury is taking this, of course. But if our chat is any sign of what those jurors might be thinking, this witness may have some credibility issues coming from this cross-examination. But anyway, the final thing that I want to talk about with Julie is how Yannetti went over her testimony about the black blob that she said that she saw in the snow. He started with her walk out the door.
Fair to say that walking out the front door of that house, you saw no body on that front lawn in front of you, correct?
When I walked out,
Correct.
no.
None of the other three people yelled out that they saw a body, correct?
Correct.
You got into Jennifer McCabe's vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And you were seated behind the driver, correct?
Yes.
And the driver was Matthew McCabe, correct?
Correct.
Jennifer McCabe was in the front passenger seat,
Yes.
and Sara Levinson was sitting next to you behind the front passenger, correct?
Yes.
Matthew McCabe backed the car out of the driveway and then headed up toward Chapman Street, correct?
Yes.
That meant that the passenger's side of the vehicle was closest to the Albert home, correct?
Yes.
So that meant that Sara Levinson and Jennifer McCabe were in the seats that were closest to the Albert home, correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. As Matthew McCabe was driving that vehicle alongside the Albert property line, Jennifer McCabe in the front passenger seat and Sara Levinson in the rear passenger seat were the closest two people to the Albert home, correct?
Yes.
And as the car passed in front of the Albert home, you saw no tire tracks in the snow, correct?
I don't remember.
You claim now to have seen a black object in the snow, correct?
Yes.
Object is the term that you used when you were finally interviewed about this matter, correct?
A black object, yes.
Right. You never before ever told any investigator that what you actually saw was a black blob, correct?
I don't remember.
And you also never, ever told any investigator that this black object that you described was actually 5 feet or 6 feet long, correct?
Correct, yes.
The very first time you're now mentioning this testimony that this black object, as you describe it, was actually 5 or 6 feet long was just today, after 12 noon on May 14th of 2024, correct?
Lally asked me how big it was, so I just told him right now, yeah.
Yeah, Lally, when you say Lally, you mean Mr. Lally.
Yes, Mr. Lally, correct, yes.
Mr. Lally just asked you during this trial, again,
Yeah.
right before this jury. That's the first time you've ever been asked or ever given an answer as to how big that object was, correct?
Not necessarily, no.
Did you review any report that was taken when the investigators spoke to you regarding this case before taking the stand today?
No.
You've never testified in a grand jury regarding this case, correct?
Correct.
You've never testified in any hearing regarding this case, correct?
In this hearing, in this case,
Besides today.
no.
And you would agree with me that it is nowhere on record that this black object that you talk about was ever 5 or 6 feet long prior to telling the jury that today.
Objection.
You have to ask that differently, Mr. Yannetti.
Today, this afternoon, is the first time that you've provided testimony or information to any official regarding this case that the object was 5 or 6 feet long.
No.
I'm sorry?
No.
Who did you tell prior to today?
About what?
Okay, I thought we were talking about the fact that you've now testified that this black object was 5 or 6 feet long. You recall that?
Today, yes.
And my question to you was, you've never mentioned that this black object was 5 or 6 feet long until the last hour or so when Mr. Lally questioned you about it, correct?
Yes.
Now, when you were passing the property, you did not think it was a body.
At the time, no.
You claim that you told everyone in the car that you saw something, correct?
Correct.
And your friend Sara said what? Or something to that effect, correct?
Correct.
And there was no further conversation after that, correct?
Not that I can remember. No.
And you didn't think that it was a person who was in trouble, correct?
Objection.
Did you think that? At what time, Mr.?
When you're leaving the property, after leaving the house at 1:45 a.m. and getting into the McCabe vehicle and passing the Albert lawn, you did not think that you saw a person who was in trouble, correct?
No.
Or a person that may have needed help, correct?
I don't know, no.
And you were right there, correct, passing the property?
I was passing the property,
Not
yes.
as close to the property as your friend Sara Levinson, but you were in the back seat on the driver's side, correct?
Correct.
And you were in a car such that if you thought that you saw something that could have been a person, all you had to do was tell the driver, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you tell the driver that you saw somebody who was in trouble?
Well, I said it out loud in the car.
So is it your testimony now that you said out loud in the car, there's a person who's in trouble?
That's not what I said, no.
You didn't mention a person at all in the car, correct?
No.
You did not tell Matthew McCabe, hey, stop the car, correct?
I did not know.
So this is a very, very different look on her testimony after cross-examination. And you know, jurors might still be thinking that they're convinced that she saw John O'Keefe's body in that moment. But personally, I think this cross-exam did a great job of putting that into question. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Do you think that Julie Nagel comes away looking credible as a witness here? Does the prosecution look like they're starting to make some headway on this murder charge? Or are you thoroughly unconvinced? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could like the video. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm god. And if you're new here and you want to see more daily coverage of the Karen Read murder trial, in recaps and in our live gavel to gavel coverage, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out. See you on day 12.